official version of current offense. According to file documentation, Mr. Johnson is before the court for 2 counts of disobeying a court order. Offender's version of current offense. Mr. Johnson described himself as the leader of the Rights to Sleep campaign, which aims to gain the rights for the homeless to erect tents on public property during the day.
I never said anything about being a leader. I just said that the Right to Sleep campaign started when I started at St. Anne's.
He explained that he continued to camp on public property, such as in parks, despite court orders prohibiting him from doing so, which led to his current breaches of court order. In regards to his campaign, Mr. Johnson stated, "It's about fate, it's not a religious thing. People don't make choices." Criminal court history, adult history. According to his
She didn't find that crazy, just so people know. Apparently, the understanding of fate isn't necessarily earmarked as instantly an indication of craziness.
No, absolutely not. And many great thinkers throughout thousands of years of history have talked about determination. Court history. Let's get back to this.
All right.
According to his criminal record, Mr. Johnson has a prison prior conviction for theft under $1,000 in 1995. In 2004, he was convicted of failed to comply with probation order and received 4 counts of same in 2005. In 2006, Mr. Johnson was convicted of obstructing a peace officer, 2 breaches of conditioned sentence order, and 2 counts of failed to comply with probation order. Wow, you sound pretty bad. He was convicted of 2 municipal bylaw offenses in 2009, as well as breach of an unescorted temporary absence. Wow. Unescorted temporary absence. Interesting. And in 2010, he was convicted of 2 more counts of breach of UTA. Finally, Mr. Johnson received 4 convictions for municipal bylaw offenses, half of which were in 2011 and the other half in 2012.
And there were a lot more than all of what they're saying there.
But that's a lot. That's the origins of the Right to Sleep campaign. Mr. Johnson explained that in November of 2000, he had moved back to Victoria from Korea and had a moment of clarity. He began living outside. Mr. Johnson reported that the city made an effort to get people out of the park in the fall of 2003, and city workers would put fish fertilizer down where the homeless community slept. He says of his political action, "It's the only path that can maintain my sanity. Making mass enlightenment would be nice. People have to get comfortable with really hard lives if they're going to love truth. It was never about me fighting for the rights of the homeless. It's between me and the crown. I would rather die than adhere to a lie." In the process of pursuing his cause, Mr. Johnson violated municipal bylaws multiple times. Mr. Johnson reported that he has been incarcerated 4 times, with the longest period being 40 days.
I was incarcerated a lot more than 4 times.
There is a complete record of his incarcerations on the web, and anybody who's interested can look that up. It's a quite extensive history, much bigger and much more involved than what I'm reading here. Mr. Johnson, back to their report, Mr. Johnson abstained from food and drank only water. But during his incarceration, he doesn't eat in jail. And this is David Johnson here right now filming me reading this evaluation. Okay. Childhood family history. Mr. Johnson was born and brought up near Black Hills, Alberta.
Falls.
Black Falls, yeah, exactly. And it has 1 older sister. His parents divorced when he was 3 or 4 years old, and he resided with his mother but saw his father on weekends. Mr. Johnson described his family as never having been above the poverty line, but states that they felt fortunate because his grandparents helped them get a house where they had room to play. Mr. Johnson maintains fairly regular contact with his mother and calls his father once a year at Christmas. You know, this is pretty personal. They really get to in a sense they must hit some strings in you. when they talk about you like that?
No, really the least of it.
Like now, formal education, employment history, all kind of boring, really.
Yeah, we didn't dwell on it.
Substance use history. Mr. Johnson reported that he first tried marijuana at the age of 17. Previous mental health, psychiatric history. Although Mr. Johnson reported that he has never had a formal psychological assessment, he did share that he had contact with a psychologist or psychiatrist while in jail, which consisted of 1 or 2 sessions aimed at discussing his hunger strike. He also indicated, I have had 2 recognizable nervous breakdowns. They were both very healthy and predictable. When asked to elaborate on what the term nervous breakdown meant for him, he described periods lasting approximately half a day, during which he felt shaky, nauseous, and anxious. He indicated that the first occurrence of these symptoms were in 1993 on his last day of work at a summer camp. He had spent 4 months getting approximately 4 hours of sleep per night, and Mr. Johnston, they got this all in your record? This is all the relevant data? Attributed his anxiety symptoms to sleep deprivation. The second instance was while he was in Korea, and he stated that was not as intense and kind of like a spiritual cold sweat. This is not very interesting.
That's why we have the miracle of editing.
Clinical impressions. Current mental status. Mr. Johnson is a 40-year-old man who arrived for the interview wearing mismatched clothes. He appeared clean, although he had a slight, unrecognizable odor. And had long hair. That's true, he has long hair. And a long beard. That's true, too, he has a long beard. He made good eye contact throughout the interview. I bet you did. Although Mr. Johnson appeared somewhat hesitant to disclose information that he deemed irrelevant at the beginning of the interview, he seemed to become more comfortable by the midway point. That is very funny. Mr. Johnson shared that he was a video game nerd earlier in life and now considers himself a weird homeless guy. At the end of the interview, Mr. Johnson was informed that sometimes individuals are asked to return to complete psychological testing. He replied to this by saying, "Nothing more is needed here." Good for you. "I've given you everything you need in this case." It was explained to Mr. Johnson that sometimes psychological testing can be helpful in providing more information about personality. This time, he replied, "How would me coming back further your inspiration to quit your job?" "That's why I wouldn't come back," Mr. Johnson exercised his prerogative to decline voluntary participation in further psychological testing. Wow, that's pretty good. I like that. Those are good statements. That's pretty good. Yeah, I've given you everything you need in this case, and I bet you did. Did they say what did you give them?
She goes on a little bit about it. She got a real nice, concise, people actually don't make choices explanation. But she just sort of paraphrases it into my belief in fate and leaves it at that.
Well, I mean, it is an academic study for long thousands of years.
It's only a delusion that people think that they're an average Joe.
What? There's nothing average?
It's all average, baby.